Good evening from San Diego. I'm Chris Hayes. The anger is rising. You can feel it as the world's richest man, Elon Musk, an unelected billionaire, is unlawfully hollowing out the United States government, seizing control of payment and personnel systems, of the data of millions of Americans, trying to shut down agencies that Congress duly created. Americans across the country in protests and demonstrations and teach-ins are focusing their outrage on Musk with calls of fire Elon, even though it is not entirely clear who he is working for other than himself. We're going to have much more on those protests later in the show. They are growing. But Musk is still pushing on, continuing to invade government systems. Today, staffers with his extra-governmental Department of Government Efficiency reportedly entered the headquarters of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Maryland, as well as the building of its parent agency, the Department of Commerce in Washington. They apparently just sort of walked past security and said, "Get out of my way," and they're looking for access to the IT systems as they have in other agencies. Andrew Rosenberg, a former NOAA official with knowledge of the incident, told Mother Jones. He added, "They will have access to the entire computer system, a lot of which is confidential information." Now, it should be noted here that Project 2025, the right-wing blueprint for Trump's second term, which polled abysmally and Trump tried to deny he had anything to do with, well, look at that. It called for NOAA to be broken up and downsized because its role in promoting climate science was harmful to U.S. prosperity. Musk staffers have also gained access to payment and contracting systems at the extremely important and crucial Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That is the source of health insurance for more than 150 million older and poorer Americans. And again, as with much of this, what is he doing with that access? Totally unclear. Who knows? He did post on the social media platform he owns saying, yeah, this is where the big money fraud is happening. This all comes on the heels of Musk's other moves, including his sudden and illegal attempt to shut down the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is already wreaking havoc on public health and life-saving aid around the world, and his takeover of the Department of Treasury's internal payment system that manages the payments of $6 trillion of U.S. government money. Trump officials continue to insist that Musk's access to that crucial, basically the government's bank account, that access is read-only. Insiders say otherwise. Multiple sources telling Wired that a 25-year-old engineer named Marco Ellis, who previously worked for two Elon Musk companies, has direct access to Treasury Department systems responsible for nearly all payments made by the U.S. government. Two of those sources say that Ellis's privileges include the ability not just to read, but to write code on two of the most sensitive systems in the U.S. government. These systems control, on a granular level, government payments that in their totality amount to, ready for this, more than a fifth of the entire U.S. economy. One 25-year-old mucking around in that system. This is just a fraction of what the world's richest man, a guy that no one voted for, a guy who's actually constitutionally banned for running for president, has done to take over the U.S. government. And so Democrats on the House Oversight Committee, tasked, of course, with the duty of oversight, tried to do some of that oversight today, to subpoena Musk, to just have him come to testify before the committee about what he's up to. Interestingly, the committee's Republican members refused to allow debate on the motion, and when Democrats argued, that chaos unfolded.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's outrageous that this committee will not even entertain a motion.
No, you state your...
Chairman, that's not a point of order.
Somebody who's breaking the law and dismantling our federal agencies. Data, and you will not even entertain a motion to break this
As are in favor of tabling.
Yes, let's have order in this country.
Stansberry, you're out of order. You know you're out of order. You know the rules of this committee. There's been a motion.
Mr. Elon Musk is out of order and dismantling.
He's out of order.
God.
I call the question.
There's been a motion and second. Motion by Dr. Fox, second by Mr. Higgins to table. All those in favor of tabling signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
It's interesting. They're very, very precise about their rules, like who gets to wield power in their committee. Seem less precise about that in other domains. Now, the move to subpoena Musk was quashed by the House Republicans tasked with doing government oversight. Obviously, they don't want him before them. One of the main reasons why this is so important is because Elon Musk, the man Republicans are letting dismantle, muck with swaths of the federal government, has a direct personal and financial interest in dismantling much of the government. He is a walking conflict of interest. I won't even mention all of the investigations into safety issues or regulatory oversight. But let me give you an example here. He bragged he spent last weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. That came a day after he posted, quote, USAID is a criminal organization, time for it to die. What Musk never mentioned anywhere was that USAID's Inspector General was in the process of investigating its own public-private partnership between Musk's Starlink and the Ukrainian government at the time that the billionaire's Doge crippled the agency. That investigation was launched with a public announcement last year. Its status now unknown, but I think you can take a guess if it will continue. Those Starlink consoles were just a fraction of the business that Musk companies do with the federal government. Over the past decade, just two of his companies, Tesla and SpaceX, have won more than $15 billion in contracts, according to the New York Times. Not chump change. Most of that comes from his space business, which effectively dictates NASA's rocket launch schedule. But last September, the FAA announced plans to fine SpaceX for skirting launch safety rules, including using an unapproved launch control room. That same day, Musk lashed out, saying humanity will forever be confined to Earth unless there is radical reform at the FAA. A week after that, Musk called for the resignation of the FAA's chief. Then last month, in the final days of the Biden administration, a SpaceX Starship exploded shortly after takeoff, spreading an estimated 100 tons of debris beyond protected areas. Air traffic controllers had to deal with the aftermath of that with the planes that they were guiding safely. There were reports of debris and damage on the Turks and Caicos Islands. Air traffic in the area had to be briefly diverted. SpaceX announced it had undergone a, quote, rapid unscheduled disassembly. The FAA immediately grounded SpaceX, barring future launches until an investigation could be conducted. 3 days later, Donald Trump became president, and the FAA administrator, who Elon Musk wanted out, announced his resignation. Given all of that, given Elon Musk's penchant for exploding rocket ships, what he likes to call rapid unscheduled disassembly, you'd think he's the last guy the FAA would want weighing in on issues of public transportation safety, especially when those issues were just illustrated the stakes of recently. But you would think wrong. As a former TV reality star and newly minted Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy posted today on Musk's platform, quote, big news, talk to the Doge team. They're going to plug in to help upgrade our aviation system. Just the world's richest man, who's been empowered to get into the back end of virtually every facet of the U.S. government and do whatever he wants, while he has billions and billions and billions of dollars at stake.
But I said some of the pushback is happening in unexpected ways. I will say one of the things that happened today happened at the General Services Administration, GSA. One of Musk's guys held a video meeting with a whole division of employees at the GSA. And Musk's guy was telling them at this video meeting, this video conference, that they really ought to consider this fork in the road offer. That's what they're calling it. This fork in the road offer that demands their resignations and threatens them if they don't do it. In this video conference with Musk's guy, the employees there at GSA responded, I don't know, am I allowed to say they responded beautifully? Is that okay? Quote, his assurances did not appear to work. Employees in the division then rained down spoon emojis in the chat that accompanied the video meeting, which was watched by more than 600 people, according to photos of the chat screen provided to the Times and 3 people familiar with the reaction. Some employees then added spoon emojis to their statuses on Slack. Oh, you want us to take your fork in the road? Oh, you do? You think we should take this fork in the road? How about fork you? Here's 1 million spoon emojis. They think people are just going to roll over and go along with them while they destroyed the government? Really? People weren't going to get mad and also get creative and also laugh in your face? Fork in the road. The one place that they really have done everything they can to just destroy a part of the government, even though it's illegal for them to do so, is, of course, at USAID, which does foreign aid. And there's different arguments about this. I think presumably they started there and they went for their most radical action there because they figured that Americans wouldn't care, because they figured that this was not going to be an issue that Americans thought was an important thing. It's just something that, only Beltway elites would care about. And their voters, people in the heartland, they definitely wouldn't care because obviously it has nothing to do with them. How's that working out? Here's News Channel 12, KWCH in Wichita, Kansas.
The Kansas Farmers Union warns that disruptions to this program could eliminate an entire market for Kansas farmers. The initiative sends excess crops like wheat and sorghum to food insecure regions worldwide.
It'll certainly be an economic hit to Kansas farmers. USAID purchases about $2 billion worth of commodities that are grown not just here in Kansas, but across the country every year.
Kansas farmers freaking out about this because where do you think American food aid comes from? Does it come from Mars? No, we do not occupy Mars. No, American food aid largely comes from a place called America, where Americans live. The Associated Press has been all over this week, reporting that what Trump and Rubio and Musk have done already with this foreign aid gambit has already stuck literally hundreds of millions of dollars worth of food and medicine that has already been delivered to ports abroad, but it's sitting stuck in ports and it can't be unloaded because nobody knows what these clowns are doing. And they tried to do this with a stroke of the pen and no planning. That includes American-grown food sold to the program by American farmers. Kansas Republican Senator Jerry Moran among those freaking out about the perishable American-grown food that is now sitting there to rot with all the American farmers and contractors who supply these programs being told, how great it is that Elon's feeding this part of the U.S. government to the wood chipper, and shouldn't we all be cheering that? At just one trade association in the D.C. area, contractors have reportedly racked up $350 million in unpaid bills already, just since they stopped the foreign aid. The estimated job losses in the United States, just to contractors who supply these specific programs. The job loss in the United States is thought to be about 52,000 jobs. These are people who are not government employees. These are people who work in the private sector. Right? They keep saying, private sector jobs are the only ones that count. If you work for the federal government, that's a low productivity job. You ought to resign. You ought to get out or else. Well, here's 52,000 people who work in the private sector who Trump has just thrown out of a job. 52,000 Americans who have contract jobs related to this one agency and its programs, which they tried to blow up, again, just by saying so, even though it's illegal and even though they rolled it out with zero planning. I mean, please. Even if you don't consider, stuff like this, capital city of Uganda, right? This is not like backcountry. This is a big cosmopolitan city. Lots of traffic in and out of it. It's the capital city of a large country. Capital city of Uganda, Kampala, is having its first Ebola epidemic in years right now. And there is a U.S. team there that would be leading the response to Ebola so it doesn't spread and, among other things, come here. That Ebola team in Uganda has just been axed with no warning as Uganda is having a brand new Ebola epidemic. Does that seem smart? Even if you don't consider the fact that one of the teams just axed by Trump and Rubio and Musk with no warning is the U.S. team that designs really highly specialized treatment regimes for individual patients who have multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. Why do you need to do that? You need to do that because you don't want multi-drug resistant tuberculosis to overrun the globe. Right? The people who are designing specialized treatment regimes for people with potentially the most dangerous pathogen in the world, axed with no warning, stop work. And by the way, you can't even access your email or any of your files. Do you think that makes the people who actively have multi-drug resistant tuberculosis right now somehow magically stop work on that too? I mean, even if you don't consider just the deep, deep stupidity of cutting people and programs like that, there's also plainly a political miscalculation here. A miscalculation that we, the people, are also stupid, and we're also mean, and we won't get it, right? And we won't care. That's why they went after USAID and foreign aid first. They were clearly wrong about that. I mean, this was the huge, basically spontaneous protest that broke out at the USAID building on Monday when Trump ordered the building shut overnight on Sunday night. And look at this. This was today. This was today. In the shadow of the U.S. Capitol, in the cold, again, on zero notice, as Americans protested simultaneously in 50 state capitals and cities all over the country, yet more people, look at this, thousands of people turned up today in Washington on zero notice to try to save USAID, to stand up for foreign aid. And tons of Democratic officials showed up as well.
Make no mistake about it, Elon Musk's effort to dismantle the Agency for International Development is a gift to China, it's a gift to Russia, it's a gift to our adversaries around the world.
Who the hell does Musk think he is? He has absolutely no right in shutting down USAID. We cannot allow that. We've got to take to the streets, we've got to take to the rallies, we've got to fight back, and we must resist every motion, every action by Musk and Trump to shut down this government. In the Congress, we must equally resist what is happening. We cannot let it go on. We must resist. We must be in the streets. We must take every possible action to stop what is happening. Don't just show up here. They're not choosing. I was with community health centers today in Virginia. They're getting shut down in red parts of the state and blue parts of the state. We're only going to break this when we have Republicans willing to stand up as well. Put the pressure not just on us, but on everyone, every elected official level. That's the only way we're going to win this.
This is a big day today. I mean, that was Washington. After what I just showed you at the top of what was happening in all 50 states in the country simultaneously. Oh, yeah, don't protest now. Keep your powder dry. I think people are plenty mad already. They're taking as much ground as they can, as fast as they can. They're seeing what gets them pushback. You know what gets them pushback? All the things they thought would be easy. There's another protest tomorrow against their attack on foreign aid, specifically on the HIV programs, tomorrow at the State Department building at 11 a.m. It's all happening at once.
But we begin tonight with growing glimmers of the Rebel Alliance. Look at these scenes as thousands of Americans in 50 states took to the streets today to reject the MAGA hostile takeover of American democracy, denouncing everything from Donald Trump's calls to occupy Gaza to his Project 2025 playbook and the seemingly unlimited authority Trump has handed to Elon Musk with zero checks and balances and no oversight. Barely 2 weeks into the Trump administration, signs of the collapse of constitutional order ushered in by Musk, an unelected South African-born billionaire, and a handful of teen and young adult employees from his private companies are everywhere. Musk and his junior staffers have infected government agencies, potentially illegally pushing out tens of thousands of civil servants and gaining unfettered access to some of the federal government's most sensitive payment systems. Think Social Security, student loans, and federal grants to businesses and organizations serving seniors and the poor, plus the private personnel files of potentially every federal employee and maybe every American Social Security number. Republicans have met this power grab by a bunch of tech bros young enough to be their kids with what can only be called cowardly capitulation. They've called Democrats and legacy media hysterical for saying, hey, maybe a bunch of 20-somethings that nobody elected shouldn't be rooting around in our personal data with zero knowledge of how basic government functions and no oversight. I mean, would you be comfortable with a precocious teenager stepping in and performing open heart surgery on you? I doubt it. So why should we be cool with random Elon staffers barging into federal government offices and taking over the systems that make sure your mom and dad get their Social Security checks? Your kids get Head Start, or your autistic son gets a special education aid at school. Look, I get it that many Americans' eyes just glaze over about a bunch of agencies with alphabet names. But believe it or not, these agencies help keep us safe and alive. EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, makes sure Americans have clean air, land, and water by regulating how much grunk oil and chemical companies can dump into our rivers and streams. How do you make America healthy again with cancer-causing poisons flowing into the tap water? DOE, the Department of Education, does not, I repeat, does not set school curriculums. But it does help kids with special needs get grants so that they have support in our public schools. FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, regulates civil aviation to make sure the planes don't fall out of the sky, like has already happened twice in 24 hours in the first 9 days of Trump 2.0. FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, makes sure that the food you eat, the lipstick you put on, and the pills you take don't kill you. Eggs are expensive right now because there's a bird flu killing birds, cows, and humans. I suspect you want the FDA to make sure that your now more expensive Waffle House eggs don't kill you, right? NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, warns us about tornadoes and hurricanes. I think Floridians would, kind of like to know when to take shelter, when 100-mile-an-hour winds are coming. But, maybe I'm wrong. Then there's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was set up to make sure that banks and credit card companies don't take you to the cleaners with crazy fees or get us into another mortgage crisis like they did in 2008. And then there's USAID, which for about 1% of our federal budget helps America counter Russian and Chinese influence around the world by helping countries struggling with famine and war and child trafficking. Without them, even more desperate people are likely to wind up here, immigration opponents. All of these agencies could go the way of the dodo bird if Musk has his way. Joni Mitchell once wrote, "You don't know what you've got till it's gone." Well, we're about to find out, because we could very well be headed into a completely deregulated world run by artificial intelligence, MAGA enforcers, and Elon fanboys who will make America work about as well as X-Twitter. What could possibly go wrong? Joining me now is Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Please correct me if I got any of that wrong.
You didn't.
Okay.
And I want to say, what was really lovely about what you just said is just to remind people, we built a government to work for all of us.
Yes.
We're just all better off if, in fact, the bird flu gets under control, and that our eggs won't kill us. We are all better off. We're better off. We make these investments in infrastructure. We make these investments in our payment system so people don't get cheated. That's how we keep the economy going. And look, bless everybody who gets out there and makes a fortune. Bless everybody who gets up every day and goes to work. But understand the underpinnings of all that are something we all invested in. And now we've got Donald Trump and his co-president, Elon Musk, and they're just running a wrecking ball through it. And it's not like it's an abstract problem. It is really and truly the kid who needs an aid to be able to sit in class so that they can get an education, taking that aid away, and maybe taking away that whole classroom. It's these very real ways that people are touched by this.
Yeah, and the thing is, when you say we, the American people, hire people like you. We hire Congress members and we hire United States senators to make the budget that even Elon Musk's contracts come from. The money that he gets and that made him rich came from the American taxpayer hiring senators, hiring Congress members. They do an appropriation because the Constitution says it's y'all's job. It is the Congress's job. What Trump is trying to reset here is to say, nope, Congress can do whatever it wants. I'm spending this money myself. And he's authorized, this is the one that blows my mind, Senator. A private citizen and a bunch of his 20-something and teenage henchmen have your Social Security number and mine, our mom's, anybody's mom's Social Security number. They can turn off their student loans. They can turn off Head Start. Who gave them that right?
Right. They can not only turn it off, the other thing is, Are you sure they didn't copy any of it while they're in there?
This is the other thing. And the piece is, so supposedly they want to use AI to try to make these cuts, right? They don't know anything about government, so they're going to let the AI bots do it. This is the fear I think I have, and I'm sure that you have, is that these unregulated people, who apparently they're giving some security clearances to, could download that data. Data is the coin of the realm.
Exactly.
They could use it to train the AI grok that he's got for Twitter. They could literally use it to profit, and we've not given them permission to do it.
That's right. And in order to get into this system, understand this is like one of the most protected systems in the world. It's just a tiny handful of people who've had access to it and who understand what it works. In order to get in, how many fences did they have to knock down? How many gates did they have to open? And how many people are sliding in behind him? I don't know. Yeah. Iranian hackers, North Korean hackers, black hats from anywhere around the world. In other words, we had a banking hearing this morning. And one of the questions that Democrats asked, we had 2 or 3 bankers there, is would you let someone come in and see your customers' private banking data?
Right.
And these bankers were like, no, never, absolutely not, no. So why is it okay for Elon Musk and a handful of people just to come in and say, you know what, we're just going to root around here for a while? And then while they're at it, why should we have the slightest bit of confidence that they're not turning off programs they don't like? They've already indicated just a week before that anything they want to shut down, they can just shut down.
Let's get into this for a moment. The claim from Republicans is that they've only got read-only access. The White House spokesperson said that today. But Elon Musk himself posted on his Twitter, no, we turned off the funding to this Lutheran organization. So he's admitting that they are doing more than. There's also some Wired reporting and other reporting that they might be downloading software onto it. We literally are told, don't click on anything on our phone because you might download malware. We don't know what that software is. You all don't know what that software is. If a foreign government was doing this, we would say that the federal government is having a cyber attack.
Oh, absolutely.
And you all passed a law banning TikTok because of the fear that the Chinese government could get access to our personal data.
Exactly right. And so now Elon Musk has got access to all of his personal data. That's exactly right.
What can be done about this?
So look, the first thing we can do is we have to raise our voices about this. Remember last week they cut off funding. They said we're going to do a pause on everything that has federal funding. And what did people do?
22 states sued.
We went to the courts, right? And we also raised our voices. Think how many people stood up and said, whoa. I want everybody to know that's my little organization here. That's my small business that can't get our. That's my NIH. I'm working on trying to cure cancer here, guys, and you just cut off my funding. I'm going to have to shut down my small business. How many people spoke out? And what happened? We've got the courts in place now, and I think the appetite for going through and trying to shut these down, at least the warning shot has been fired. So, okay, so we've held the line there. Now we come to the second one. Elon Musk comes in, and it's 2.0.
Yeah.
Instead of doing it program by program, now they've got their fingers on the keys to do it person by person, right? We don't.
I mean,
like
they could retaliate against his.
Exactly.
How is Ford comfortable, the company, with their competitor having the ability to turn off their federal grants, their contracts? He could literally have an advantage against his fellow companies. I do FAFSA. I've done FAFSA. My kids are now out of college. You put so much personal data in there. What if we don't know who these young people are. We've got their names, some of them in Wired. What if there's someone that they just have a beef with? Right. And they say, now I've got their data. I know where they live. I know their social security number. I've got their banking information. They have people's tax returns.
So this is the moment when we really start rallying the troops. People tell the stories. They do not want their personal data exposed to some unelected billionaire and a handful of people that he has picked out. That we're just not going to do that. And I really want to emphasize here, this is a time when people have power. We showed it last week by stepping up. We can show it again now. People need to stand up and tell these stories. Every time you go on social media and say, I got to thinking, I actually benefit from a federal grant, or they have my name, they have my social security. Anybody ever file taxes?
A quote, counterintelligence disaster. That's how one former intelligence official is describing a stunning new move by the Trump administration that could have compromised the identities of countless staffers at the country's top spy agency. NBC News is confirming news that was first reported by the New York Times. Reports that the CIA has sent a list of all recent hires in an unclassified email as part of its effort to comply with an executive order trimming the federal workforce. That list included the first names and first initials of the last names of everyone hired in the last 2 years, meaning that list is a potential gold mine for America's adversaries. One former senior intelligence official telling NBC News this, quote, any foreign intelligence service worth its weight could apply research and analytic tools to marry up these names and initials with other public records to identify and target many of them. And the New York Times is reporting that the list, quote, includes a large crop of young analysts and operatives who were hired specifically to focus on China and whose identities are usually closely guarded because Chinese hackers are constantly seeking to identify them. Compounding the fears that the list could get into the wrong hands, news that we've been reporting on in the last few days here, that Elon Musk and his team, people with zero government experience and no expertise in handling classified information, have been burrowing their way into practically every government agency. New York Times is reporting this, quote, some former officials said they worried that the list could be passed on to a team of newly hired young software experts working with Elon Musk and his government efficiency team. If that happens, the names of the employees might be more easily targeted by China or Russia or other foreign intelligence services. The breaking news this afternoon of a Trump administration initiative potentially endangering the identities of staffers at the CIA is where we start today. With us for the hour is Sarah Longwell. She's the publisher of The Bulwark and host of the podcast, The Focus Group. Also joining us for the hour, MSNBC national affairs analyst John Heilman here at the table. He's the chief political columnist for Puck, the host of the podcast Impolitic. But we start with the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. Congressman, tell me what you understand about this list and the employees on it.
Well, yeah, Nicole, it's been a bad day for the CIA, an agency I care a lot about. Not only is this, list of names out there so unnecessary, right? It is so easy to convey these kinds of things through classified channels. So it's an absolutely unnecessary boon to foreign intelligence services. But two, I'm sure you've also heard about the blanket retirement offer that was offered to every CIA employee. Look, I get the director's desire to try to reorient the CIA towards China. We've been doing that for many years. What are we going to do when 3 of our very best China analysts, fluent in Mandarin, with 2 years worth of work to get them their security clearances, decide to take this retirement package? So again, a tough day for national security. But to answer your question directly, look, it is not hard when you combine. Let's imagine that the Chinese see that somebody named Bob Smith is on that list. Not hard to get credit card records for Northern Virginia. Not hard to look at residencies or voter registration rolls or Facebook pages that indicate where you live to figure out who somebody is, even if their name is slightly masked. So, yeah, this is, as your person put it, anybody worth their salt could pretty easily get to actual names. And these are people who, in many instances, will have spent, years in training and arguably years in getting security clearances. So just an absolute unnecessary counterintelligence risk was assumed today.
Let me share the Wall Street Journal reporting about the buyout with our viewers. This was first reported by the Wall Street Journal. The CIA offered buyouts to its entire workforce Tuesday in what officials said is a bid to bring the agency in line with Trump's priorities, including targeting drug cartels. The agency is also freezing the hiring of job seekers already given a conditional offer. An aide to CIA Director John Ratcliffe said some are likely to be rescinded if the applicants don't have the right background for the agency's new goals, which include Trump's trade war and undermining China. It feels like the undermining of China is inconsistent with the list that was created of new analysts focused on China. Have you been given any explanation for why the names on the list were put on the list other than they were hired in the last 2 years?
No, not at all. Again, the committee has not yet received any information on this, but you can bet we'll be requesting information. You know, the example I just used, as long as we're talking about the Chinese, you know who's worth their weight in gold? The young person who is fluent in Mandarin and Cantonese, who was born in this country but who is culturally familiar with China. That person is somebody we are going to invest an immense amount of money in. We are going to hire into the CIA, and they are going to be single-handedly critical to our national security. And it is now possible, in my previous example, I used Bob S. I'm guessing that there's a reasonable probability that somebody who grew up in a culturally Chinese family may not have such a common first name. It is now very possible that the Chinese know who that individual might be.
Do we know how many people were covert individuals? And I guess I ask that because a list with names, you know, sometimes CIA employees try to blend in with an embassy workforce, and sometimes they're posted all over the world. I mean, do we know, has Mr. Ratcliffe fielded any questions or offered any reassurances that these individuals knew their names would be put on an unclassified list and shared with the Trump White House?
Yeah, again, what an unnecessary mistake, right? It is so easy to send classified information from one government agency to the other. So this, to me, was just it appears to have been done because of inattention. And I'll make another point, because yes, you know, somebody who's going to spend their career as an analyst, you know, primarily sitting in the Washington metropolitan area, their cover matters less than somebody who is maybe going to operate under non-official cover. Non-official cover means they're not covered by diplomatic immunity. There's a little bit of a spectrum of risk and importance of cover there. But guess what? That analyst who may be spending most of their career in the Washington metropolitan area will from time to time meet with people in cafes or elsewhere around the world who have much, much more valuable and dangerous covers. So again, nothing good to be said about what we saw happen today.
I want to just play a little bit of an interview I did with Sue Gordon in 2022 about this was when it was widely believed that Trump would run for president again. Trump is sort of always going to run for president again because he never conceded his defeat in 2020. Let me just play this for you. It had some particular resonance for me today.
My experience is that the former president has his agenda, and he will use whatever is at his disposal to advance that. The problem we have here is that depending on what agenda issues forth, he has had at his disposal for a long period of time information that if he used that information to advance an agenda item, it could have devastating consequence to national security. But I can't think of a simpler way to say why I think that this moment is so difficult. And that's because there's no justification in knowing who he is and that he doesn't fully understand, but he may not decide to protect if he wanted to do something different.
So that's the former director of national intelligence, Sue Gordon, and the "it" is the intelligence product. But listening to her say in 2022, after Trump was indicted for mishandling national defense information, the Mar-a-Lago documents case, saying knowing who he is and that he doesn't fully understand, he may not decide to protect it if he wanted to do something different. I guess I wanted to share that with you as someone who has taken an oath but is in the minority as a member of the Democratic Party. What is owed to these individuals whose first initial their last names is now circulating in an unclassified list in Washington?
Well, Nicole, they take some of the same risks that our men and women in uniform take. And often with less protection, right? Because they are, by definition, certainly the ones that are operational, the case officers who are operating in very, very dangerous places around the world. They are living undercover. If they are discovered, and especially those that don't have diplomatic immunity, I mentioned them earlier, you know, it can be curtains for them. And that's why we go to such lengths especially in this world of digital dust, meaning wherever you move with a cell phone, wherever you swipe a credit card, wherever you use a debit card, there is a record that in theory somebody can get. That's why we go to such great lengths to make sure that, our trainees are not buying gas, at the gas station next to headquarters in Langley, Virginia. We really go to great lengths. And what's so painful about this episode is, again, it's just not that hard to convey classified information from one government department to the other. So we've put a lot of people needlessly at risk here. And young people at the start of their careers. These are people who, if they do well, are going to spend decades keeping the American people safe. And now, over the course of that many decade career, they'll wonder, has my cover been compromised?
Aaron, what is your reaction to this? And I don't know, do we call it a proposal? Do we call it a plan? Do we call it an idea? What's your reaction to it?
My head was exploding when I listened to the press conference. 27 years of working for Republicans and Democrats, from the Carter administration to Bush 43. No administration that I worked for ever conceived of an idea which was more detached from reality and more dangerous, perhaps with the exception, and that there was context here with respect to 9/11 for our invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And it just strikes me how much of an outlier the president actually is. You have a situation where the U.S. has now tethered itself to an approach which, at best, will be interpreted as forced transfer. Number one, he's undermined traditional U.S. allies, Egypt and Israel, who doesn't look at this they don't look at it as a real estate deal. It's an existential threat for them to absorb large numbers of Palestinians. He's validated the fantasies and the narrative of the Israeli right. And he sent an unmistakable signal to Putin and to Xi that if, in fact, you want territory, you simply aspire to it, and you state your capacity completely untethered from anything, international law, logic, rationality, to basically assert your control over it. And it was all done standing next to an Israeli prime minister who looked like a cat that had just swallowed a canary. The real takeaway, final point, Jose, the real takeaway here is not the unserious proposal by an unserious president over Gaza. The real takeaway to me is the fact that this press conference was a no daylight between Israel and the U.S. press conference. He's equipped the prime minister with talking points that will help him keep his government together. And it just seems to me what's at stake here is real. That is to say, the implementation of the first and second phase of the Gaza agreement. He more or less stepped away from that. Those are the thoughts.
Aaron, I'm just thinking about your vast experience on issues. And, I think it's important to just, underline just how much experience you have and how many different negotiations you have been a part of. And I'm just wondering, when all of those negotiations, for the vast majority of them, ended up with no progress for the Palestinian people. And, Camp David and the Abraham Accords, yes. But, Aaron, where does negotiating the same terms and under the same language become just an echo repeating itself? And where do you draw the line, Aaron, on stating things that are completely maybe impossible, but that as a negotiating tactic could at least elicit a different conversation?
Yeah, I stand alone in terms of the number of failed negotiations I've participated in. But this is not that. This is something that goes beyond even failed American peacemaking efforts. This is an effort to shackle the Arab states with the absorption of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who have already been traumatized and are going to become refugees again should this plan be implemented. And it's so detached from reality that I think it has zero chance of being implemented. But what is missing here, Jose, is leadership. And if you want a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if you want a conflict-ending solution, if you want to best all previous efforts by Republicans and Democrats, then what you need, are Israeli and Palestinian leaders who are masters of their political houses, not prisoners of their ideologies, leaders who are prepared to recognize that negotiation is not based on an asymmetry of power, but on a balance of interests. And together with those Israeli-Palestinian leaders, you need an American president who's got will and skill and a reasonable interpretation of what is required to solve, or at least to begin to address, what I call the problem of the much too promised land. That's missing. You don't have leadership in Israel, you don't have leadership in Palestine, and you certainly, based on what I saw last night, you don't have leadership in Washington.